Hope you lose those notes, because just in case. Good morning, church. Do you know how hard it is to follow that? It'd be kind of be an entertainer to be up here after all that stuff, and I don't know if I should use the leaf blower or not, but no. Hey, my name is Chris. I'm honored to get to share hopefully a word of encouragement with you this morning. If you're new here at Friendship, bear with us. If it's terrible, just know I'm not up here very often. How's that? Okay? And if you're thinking now that Jed is not preaching and some other guy is that you don't know, that you're going to, like sneak out to the restroom and then maybe not come back in, that's fine. That's fine. It's not going to bother me at all. You're not going to offend me in any way if you do that. I just want you to know that I have a bone to pick with Jed, and I'm going to do that here in a minute, so if it's going to get a little spicy, and if you want to hear that, you better stay. But if you want to leave, that's up to you. So, how many of you like a good story? A good story? And isn't this a cool story, this book, this story? I'm not going to try and recap all the first 14 chapters. Who could possibly do that? But one of the common themes is this idea that there's a struggle, there's a tug of war going on. And we see it in the Garden of Eden at the very beginning, where there's God's perfect will and perfect way. And then the tension between that and mankind is that mankind wants their way and their will. And it's destructive and selfish. And there's this tug of war, and it just continues to happen. It comes up all over the place. You see it in Cain and Abel's story. You see it in when the judges arrive, and this cycle of the judges trying to call God's people back to God, and they come back for a bit, and then they turn away, and they cry out, and he sends another judge. And in the garden, the people had a king. They had a king. God was king, the one and only king. But people wanted a different king, wanted a human king. And so God gave them what they asked for. And he sends Saul. And we see Saul's story start to unravel and come apart. And then he sends David. And David's a good king, a man after God's heart. But even David falters. And then Solomon we heard about last week. And we just continue to see this story, this tug of war in place. And it's funny to me that we are still a part of that tug of war. Even today, we're in this tug of war with God. Now, I don't know if you saw it, but the NFL had at the Pro Bowl, they had a tug of war contest, and they had football players on each side, these big, giant, muscular guys pulling a tug of war, and they were huge. So could you imagine, like, if the two or three of us got together on one side and the NFL guys were on the other side, we probably wouldn't fare very well. We would probably struggle, right? Now, think about this. The God who created all the universe, including those NFL football players, and the mountains, and the fire, and the stars, and the moon, and the sun, and everything that we know that exists, we're tugging a war with him. You think we're going to have any chance at winning that? I don't think so. And so these kings continue to come, and King Ahab is the king in our story today that we'll look into, and we're going to get to talk about Elijah. Now, here's my bone to pick, okay? Jed says to me a few months ago, hey, you can preach from any chapter you want to. Just pick one. Let me know which one it is. And two things happen, okay? First of all, I really like Elijah. Man, I like him. He's an awesome character. But then I read the chapter after I pick from it because of who's in the chapter, and I realize, whoa, you can't preach all of this in a sermon. We need 10 sermons for this chapter, just like every other chapter in the story. And so Jed puts me on the spot to try to present in a short amount of time, just the next couple of hours, the story of Elijah and these other prophets. But then, after I selected, and he said, take any one you want. A week or two later, he says, oh, that's my favorite chapter. And now he says he takes notes, and he's going to check me. I think I was set up. So we'll have words later, maybe. I don't know who's right, who's wrong. It doesn't matter. You like a good story? Do you like a good story? My kids are in junior high and high school now, and in recent years they've been running track and cross country. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach them and encourage them in is like, when you start the race, make sure you give it all that you have, running all the way to the finish line. And the way that you'll know that you gave everything that you have is that right after you cross the finish line, you should puke. If you give all you have before you get there and puke before you arrive at the finish line, you gave all before you should have. But if you cross the finish line and you're not losing it right there, then you left something out on the course. You didn't give all you had. And they look at me with the same faces that most of the teenagers in here are looking at me. But I encourage them to give all they had. About 25 years ago, I was in Memphis, Tennessee. And I had traveled down there, it was later in the year, but almost 25 years ago, to watch a group of runners run in a marathon. I was specifically interested in one of the runners that was running in that marathon. And so we lined up at the starting line and got to watch them all start off. And there's thousands, it's a big marathon, thousands of people running and, cheering and yelling and all that kind of stuff. And then you've maybe been to races like this, but like you can either walk or drive a short distance and catch them as they come back another way, and maybe you do that 3 or 4 times throughout the race, and you can see the person that you're cheering for or the group that you're cheering for. And so we would do that. We'd relocate, and after a little bit, the runners start to kind of separate themselves from each other a bit, and you start to recognize shirts or colors of shoes or funny hats or just things that help you know that, oh, okay, here's the group that the person I'm watching is in. And so we'd get excited. We'd see somebody that we'd recognize, like, okay, here they come. And so whenever the person we were watching would come, we were cheering, yelling, and we were able to do that at the start of the race up through mile 16. And at mile 16, because of the path that the race took, it wasn't going to be possible to go to other stops on the race and then make it back and get a decent spot at the finish line. So mile 16, we watched, we cheered. This guy was doing really good, like impressively good. I was actually kind of shocked and excited. I thought, this is going to be probably personal best. This is exceptional, keeping a really good pace. We left there after cheering and headed back to the finish line. We're at the finish line, and I start to see some of these shirts coming along and hats that I recognize. I'm like, this is good. We're going to be cheering on here in just a minute. And then we waited. And then we waited. And we kept waiting. And person after person, now there's people I don't recognize, 80-year-old grandmas, no offense, but there's people that are coming through, literally walking, some of them, not runners, they're just participants in this marathon. I thought, this is not good. And then I saw my dad, just probably a half a mile down the road. I knew it was my dad. I knew what he was wearing. I recognized him, but honestly, he didn't look like himself. He was struggling. He was hobbled coming to the finish line. And right as he crossed the finish line, he collapsed. Like a legitimate, he fell down. And it was a big marathon. We couldn't run out and help him or anything like that. So there was a medical tent, and there was EMTs and ambulances and stuff there. But these people came out, these doctors and nurses, and they carry him onto a wheelchair and then roll him back to a tent. We couldn't go in the tent. We couldn't get into this space, and pretty concerned. Didn't find this out until later, but in talking to my dad, he said, yeah, it was going really well. And then at mile 18, I felt something snap in my right knee. But I didn't want to stop. So I kept running. And about mile 19, I stopped just for a minute, just to get a drink of water, and I could hardly get started again. And so he basically crawled his way to the finish line. He might have done that until he was in sight and then stood up to, finish strong. That's what we do when we're like that. But it was a pretty serious situation. They talked about taking him to the hospital, all kinds of things. He wasn't in good shape. But he left everything out there on that course, every bit of it. And that's why I get excited about Elijah. Because Elijah ran life with passion and intensity. He left it all on the course for God. He never stopped. He never gave up. He kept going most of the way. And we're going to see that this morning. So, I'm going to be in 1 Kings chapter 18 to start us out. And you can turn there if you want to. I wish we could just, somebody more entertaining than me could just read this story to us. I wish we could have sound effects, maybe the blower and stuff like that, but we can't. So I'm just going to kind of guide us through it just briefly here, and we're going to take a look at it. But Elijah was a prophet, a messenger of God, and he had this challenge because he felt like he was all alone, like he was the last one who was teaching God's word, the last one who was calling God's people back to the Father. And so he was struggling with this, and he was confronting these powerful kings. And King Ahab had a crazy wife. Her name was Jezebel. She was the queen. It was not a good situation. They were interesting couple for sure. And one of the things that they had done is they had brought all these fake prophets. You heard Mark say about all these liars in, and they were worshiping them. They didn't even know what they were worshiping. But Elijah confronts King Ahab, and he says, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get all the prophets of Baal and all the prophets of Asherah, that's 850 in total. I want you to bring them to the top of this mountain, and I want you to get all the people of Israel, bring them up there too, and then we're going to have a little showdown. We're going to have a little competition and figure out who the real God is. And Elijah says this in chapter 18. As he's before the people, he says, How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal's God, follow him. How long will you waver? It's the same tug of war that we're in today. How long will we waver between the one true God and all the other gods, all the other idols that want to pull us in different directions in this world? We're in the same battle that Elijah was in. So he climbs up to the top of this mountain. Now, we've got a slide here. We got to have a little bit of context for this to understand the intensity and the passion of Elijah. We've got to understand who this guy is. Now, this is a picture of Mount Carmel. Now, I will say this, disclaimer. There's a little bit of debate about, is this actually the right location? Okay. Doesn't matter too much. This may or may not be specifically a location. We know it's in a general area. And if this isn't the right mountain, the other mountains that some people think it might be look a lot like this mountain. So that doesn't make too much difference. But what you need to know about this mountain is, based on who you agree with and where it's 1,800 feet above sea level or 2,200 feet above sea level. So just for the purpose of this morning, I'm just going to say it's 2,000 feet above sea level, okay? Now, I know the map is small, and I'm sorry about that. I wish I should have enlarged it, but up in the kind of the top left corner of the green space, you'll see a little black triangle. That's Mount Carmel. That's the location we're talking about, and you can see how close that is to the sea. So, we're about 2,000 feet elevation from where they started down in the valley, down in the low space, to where they had to go up this mountain. Elijah runs up the mountain. He meets all the people. While he's on the mountaintop and confronting them, he proposes this competition to them. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to get a bull for your gods. I'll have a bull for the real God. I want you, all you prophets, to slaughter your bull and put it on the altar. I don't want you to set on fire, but what I want you to do is I want you to call out to your gods. Call out to Baal. Call out to Asherah. Call out to your God and have your God rain fire down and consume this offering. Go ahead and do that. And so they capture the bull, they butcher the bull, cut it into pieces, lay it on this altar, And they start calling out to their God. And they're calling out, and they're yelling, and they're screaming, and they're probably beating drums. And I don't know what all they were doing. They were just like yelling out for their God to rain fire down. And Elijah waits. He waits till noon. This is all morning they're doing this. And then he starts to kind of heckle them a little bit, taunt them a little, like, hey, he's probably busy. Or maybe they're sleeping. Maybe your gods are sleeping. Or maybe they're up to something else. Or maybe they just didn't hear you. Yell a little louder. Make a little more noise. And so they go right back to it, and they start yelling louder. They're screaming. They even got so intense that they take swords and spears, and they start cutting themselves, and they're bleeding all over the place. And they're yelling out to their God to call down fire. Nothing happens. Okay. Elijah is a passionate man, an intense servant of God. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Keep that in mind, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Elijah catches a bull by himself. He slaughters the bull. He cuts it up into pieces. Some of you in here, perhaps, there was one person for sure in first service, because I know the family, that has been a part of slaughtering. They've slaughtered steers. They've slaughtered hogs. I know that they get together a couple times a year and do that. Maybe some of you have. Okay, slaughtering a bull is not a one-man job. It's a many-man job, unless you have a lot of fancy tools and powerful tractors or different things to lift a bull up. But Elijah doesn't have this up on top of that mountain. Just one man cuts this bull into pieces. He also rebuilds the altar. Now, I don't know how big the altar was, but I know it was big enough to fit all the pieces of this bull on top of it. And I know it had been destroyed because he had to repair it. So he moves 12 stones, probably pretty good-sized stones, back onto the altar. Then he gathers up firewood, makes it ready for fire, takes the bull, sets it on the altar. A few years earlier, 3.5 to be exact, Elijah had confronted Ahab and said, hey, you need to turn away from your evil ways, and here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a drought. And he prayed, and there was a drought, 3.5 years. They're still in the midst of that drought. It's a pretty dire situation. Elijah is so bold and passionate, he says to the people around there, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get 4 big jars, fill them with water, bring them here, dump them on top of the bull, over the altar. And they do that. They dumped out this precious water that they had. And you know what? He does that 3 times. Like, go back and do it again. Do it again. So much so that everything was soaked. The whole area around the altar is wet. And then he says, God, hear my cry. If you are the true God, and I know you are, then bring fire down and burn this sacrifice up. And fire so intense comes down that it burns up the bull and the firewood and the stones. And it licks up all the water, and there's nothing left. Elijah has had success. After 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he's butchered a bull and built the altar. So now he marches 850 guys down the hill. I forgot to tell you this, but the path from the top of that mountain down to the valley is 4.5 miles. The nearest place to where they would have gone in the valley is another 1.5 miles. 6 miles, he comes down that with 850, has them all slaughtered and put to death. And then Elijah's not done. He runs back up the mountain, 2,000 feet, 6 miles. And he goes up there and he prays to God 7 times for a cloud to bring rain. And it finally starts to happen. And Elijah runs back down the mountain. He's up the mountain. He's down the mountain. He's butchering cows. This guy is intense. He's running a race unlike anything we would know. After 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he goes and sees Ahab. He says, hey, it's going to rain. The rain's coming. In fact, storm's coming. You need to get your chariot and you need to head out. Ahab listens, gets his chariot, and starts driving it to Jezreel. Ahab, in that moment, inspired in the power of God, he tucks his cloak into his belt, and he takes off running. And he beats the chariot to Jezreel, 18 miles. That's after he ran up and down the mountain, okay? He's a super athlete, a superman, right? Unlike us. He's amazing. He's intense. Poor Elijah. Poor Elijah. Such a successful time. He's just proven to the people that God is the true God. He's just seen the fire rain down. He's just turned Israel back to their God. And what is his reward? A nasty queen threatening to murder him. You know what he does? He runs. He runs to Beersheba. Do you know how far that is? Roughly 100 miles. And then he goes another day's journey out into the wilderness. This guy is something different. What can we learn from him? What can we learn from Elijah? Well, here's just a few things that we can take away from his story and learn from. First of all, we know that he got tired. Could you imagine yourself being tired after all of that? That's a pretty heavy afternoon and evening. I imagine I'd be a little tired. But he wasn't just tired physically, he was tired spiritually. Tired in so many ways. But God was faithful. God was faithful to him. God gave Elijah rest. We know that when he went into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush or a juniper tree. He sat down under it, he prayed, and then he fell asleep. He was tired, and God let him sleep. That was good. That was good of God. Elijah was discouraged. He was discouraged because he thought he was the only one left, the only servant of God who's still standing for what's right. I don't know if you feel that way every once in a while, but sometimes when I'm out in the world, I feel like I'm the last one who cares. I'm the last one who wants to try to live by God's will. It's discouraging sometimes to be in that spot. And Elijah found himself there. But God is faithful, and God nourished Elijah. He gave him the rest that he needed. He gave him food that he needed. He didn't leave him alone. He sent an angel. The angel taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hey, wake up. You need to eat and drink. And here's some bread and some water." He does. Then he gets to take another nap. Naps are awesome. I'm going to take a nap later today. If an angel taps me on the shoulder, I'm going to be a little worried. And then he's fed again so that he can have strength. He was nourished. Elijah was scared. Have you ever been scared? Have you been afraid? Afraid to be alone? Afraid that you're not doing all that you need to do? Elijah felt that. He knew that. But God was good. God gave him strength. He renewed him. And finally, we know that Elijah gave up. I don't want to make light of this. I don't want to make light of this. I don't know your story. I just know my own story. I know that I've been through a season in life where I wanted to give up. Like I literally was done. Didn't think I could go any further. That's not a good place to be in. It's a dark place. Elijah found himself there. He prayed this prayer. "Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." See, he didn't go out into the wilderness with food and water. God had to provide that. He went out there to die. He went out there to be done. But God is faithful. And God showed up. And God stepped into those prayers and answered in a way that only God could. So he didn't give Elijah what he asked for. He gave Elijah what he needed. And then he sent him on in ministry. Elijah then, just to show off, I think, travels another roughly 100 miles down to Mount Horeb. And he continues his ministry. He passes it on to Elisha. Elisha's the next prophet in the story chapter, and there's two others after it that we don't even have time to look at today, sadly. But instead of allowing Elijah's life and ministry to be over, he gave Elijah a legacy that he passed on. God is faithful. God is faithful. So now let me ask you this. Are you a super marathoner? Like, can you run hundreds of miles? Do you live each day of your life with the passion and an intensity that Elijah demonstrated just in one story? Or do you find yourself in this place of discouragement? Sometimes I live there. I don't feel like I've done enough. And I'm not even sure how to be like Elijah, to be honest with you. But for one thing that's pretty cool, in Matthew, and it's in the other Gospels too, I'm just picking the one out of Matthew, Jesus says this to his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" And the disciples respond, "Well, some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. And still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But who do you say I am?" "Well, we know that you're the Messiah," Peter answers. Why do you think people thought Jesus was Elijah? I think it's because he ran with passion. I think Jesus lived with intensity. I think he served with everything he had. I think that every time he would cross a finish line of a ministry or a miracle or a task, I think he left it all out there in everything that he did. And if we are followers of Jesus, if we are disciples, then who are we supposed to be like? Jesus. Christ-like, right? Like Elijah. Now, can you do that? Some of you may find yourself in a discouraged spot. I do not want to leave you there today. Okay, in our own power, in our own strength, we don't have the capacity to live like Elijah lived. His strength came from the Lord, and ours must come from him too. But there is kind of a nice thing about Elijah. I might have caused them to skip past this. I don't remember where it's at in my order, but the half-brother of Jesus wrote a letter. James is the name of the book in the Bible, and he said this about Elijah. Elijah was a human being. That's good. Superhuman, I think. No, even as we are. There's hope for us. He was ordinary just like us. Same God, same Spirit. He was just an ordinary man, and God empowered him. I told you that my kids are in track and field, and we just recently went to a track meet. It was a week or so ago, and it was a pretty good-sized track meet. There's a lot of good competition there. I was sitting pretty high up in the bleachers watching my son run, but of course he ran the last two races of the day, so I watched all the other things that happened too. It was great. It was awesome. And but in one of the races, I think it was the mile, maybe, I don't remember now, but one of the races there was a clear front runner. Like when they took off, this guy, this junior high kid was sprinting. He didn't stop sprinting until he crossed the finish line. I don't know how that's even possible, superhuman in my mind, but he was fast. He was running fast. And he separated himself from the pack pretty quickly, and it never got any closer. Okay, he's just putting distance between them. And I noticed that there was this dad. He was probably 6 or 8 bleachers down from us. There's this dad whose son was clearly not that kid in front. Okay, that was evident. And he's yelling at his son, "Reel him in! Catch him! Run faster!" And I was thinking, I wonder what that young man's thinking out there, because surely he could hear his dad. Everyone heard his dad. I wonder if he was thinking, I'm running as fast as I can. I don't have any more. Some of us hear those voices. You're not running fast enough. You're not living life on fire enough for God. Sometimes the voices come from other people. Sometimes they come from inside our own heads. Sadly, sometimes we're the voice telling somebody else. Let me tell you this. It's not about what order or rank you finish in. It's not about winning the race and crossing that line first. That's not what discipleship is about. That's not what being like Elijah is about. Elijah, no doubt, would have won the race. If we were all running together, the guy was incredible. I couldn't keep up with him. He would have crossed the line before me. What's important is that we give our best. We give our best effort. We leave what is best in us out on the course. Turn with me to Hebrews just for a moment. We're going to close with Hebrews. I want you to see this list of names. Hebrews chapter 11, there's a list of names. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab. You've heard these names. You know these people, right? They're famous. Look, the author goes on to say in verse 32, and what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. I put that in there, the prophets. That's Elijah. I don't have time to talk about them. But look, they are the ones they conquered kingdoms. They administered justice. They gained what was promised. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames. They escaped the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became powerful in battle, and they routed foreign armies. By faith. By faith. And if we turn over to verse 39, we see this encouragement to us. These people, this list, were all commended for their faith, yet not one of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us they would be perfect. They're waiting for us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, such a great grandstand of people cheering us on, let us throw off everything that hinders us, the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. He's the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I love what Jacob said. He talked about us being on different paths, right? And I love what happened when all of the seniors were up here, and they all told us where they're going and what they're planning to do. And on one side of our minds, we were thinking, they'll change their mind 100 times between now and then. And then on the other side of things, we're thinking, that's pretty cool. I don't want to go back and do that. Right? The path doesn't matter. Nurses, linemen, doctors, teachers, laborers. The path doesn't matter. What matters is how we run the race. And there is a crowd of witnesses cheering us on. David and Elijah are sitting side by side. Maybe they're eating popcorn, I don't know. But they're cheering for us. They're saying, Travis, keep running the race. You're doing good. Keep it up. One more step. One foot in front of the other. Just keep going. Just keep going. Some of you have that voice here That witness is here. Some of you, the witnesses have moved on. They've gone on before you. Now they're sitting there, loved ones, our parents, our grandparents, our friends. They're among the cloud, and they're calling out to us. Don't give up. Don't stop. You can do it. You have what it takes. Where you don't, God will step in and give you the power and strength to make it. Run the race like Elijah, with passion and intensity. I hope you leave here encouraged to know that there's a God who loves you and empowers you to run the race. Every day, everywhere we go. Not just Sunday mornings, Monday mornings, Tuesday mornings, every day, every minute, you're running a race. That's my prayer for us. Some of you need to get back on the course. Here's your invitation. It's like the on-ramp. You know, sometimes they have those people in marathons that like jump in at mile 13. They look really good, and well, we're not really cheating, but God's inviting us back on. It doesn't matter how long somebody else has been running. This is your chance to get in the race. Some of you have never thought about being a runner. You can tell I'm not just by looking at me. But we all can run with the power and strength of Elijah. And the invitation's open. You want to talk about that race, come find Jed. Come find me. Find one of us. Let me pray for us. Father God, thank you. Thank you, Lord, for sending Jesus, that he would run a perfect race, and that in doing so, he would not just give us an example, one that so often we struggle to keep up with, but that he would make a way. That he would make a way that we could join him at the finish line along with all the other witnesses who have gone before us, who have lived faithful lives, who have lived intense lives of passion and drive, guys like Elijah. God, we look forward to seeing them at the finish line and then spending all of eternity celebrating the victory that your son Jesus won. And I pray that in this room, your spirit would stir. And if there's someone here who needs to join the race, God, bring them to the start line. And we'll all cheer for them. And we just thank you for your love. I pray you'd be with us today. In Jesus' name, amen.